Discussion. Make sure this works. Raise your hand if you are currently living in Elk County. So much of what I'm going to discuss tonight is about Elk County specifically. Much of the data I'm going to share with you. But I want you to understand the trends that I'm going to discuss apply to basically all of Western Pennsylvania. So don't think this is just the story of Elk County. This is more the story of us in rural Pennsylvania. So I just want you to keep that in mind. So ready to begin.
Pardon?
I'm just saying I'm ready to begin. I wasn't sure if you had a time here or not.
What is your time limit?
So 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay.
Yes. And if anyone needs to leave, please feel free.
We're not moving.
So this map is why I'm here tonight. This map shows that Elk County has the third highest prevalence of neonatal abstinence syndrome in the state. That's the horrific condition an infant suffers when they are born addicted to drugs. The tragic story behind every piece of data on this map has resonated with me since I first viewed it last April in the Courier Express. So when it came time for me to conduct research for a graduate school project, I knew I wanted to see if this map was a tragic outlier or if other, more sinister statistics lie beneath the surface of our community. Good evening, and as you know, my name's Seth Higgins, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me to join you tonight and providing me with this opportunity. I'd also like to take some time to introduce myself so you can learn a little more about me. I graduated from the St. Mary's Public High School in 2010, and after graduation, I joined the Air Force. I separated from active duty in 2015, and then I pursued my bachelor's degree in supply chain management from the University of Pittsburgh. I graduated last April. Since this May, I've been working on my graduate degree from Brown University, where I'm studying public affairs. I'll graduate this May. I'm currently conducting my graduate school consultancy with the St. Mary's City government, where I'm primarily reviewing zoning regulations. And as mentioned, I'm also running for county commissioner. But as we will see, this is not a political speech. This is not about me, but rather, this is about us and an illness that has been spreading among our own. An illness that produces maps such as this. The presentation tonight is based on a research paper I wrote titled Elk County, Pennsylvania, Documenting and Understanding the Rise of Despair. I recognize this is a jarring title, but as we can see, this isn't just an attention grabber. This is a reality. Much of my project is based on the work of Nobel Prize-winning economists Case and Deaton. Their groundbreaking 2015 and 2017 papers blew the whistle on a concerning trend in contemporary America. Non-Hispanic whites with a high school degree or less are dying at startling rates from drug overdoses, suicides, and chronic liver diseases. These have become known as the deaths of despair. My goal is to see if Elk County was suffering from such deaths, and if so, what the origins of the epidemic may be. So first, we're going to review the work of Case and Deaton and discuss some of their theories on what might be causing these deaths of despair. Next, we'll see how well their findings and explanations hold up in Elk County. And finally, we'll conclude with a discussion on some bigger picture topics. Case and Deaton's work is rather long and heavy on data, so one of the best ways to get a quick sense of their findings is by reviewing some of their key charts and graphs. These first three graphs are from their 2015 paper, and at the end of that paper, they advance some early theories. So Case and Deaton's 2015 paper focused primarily on whites between the ages of 45 and 54. We can see that mortality for this group of Americans has been increasing in recent decades, while that has not happened in other Western countries. In this figure, they demonstrate that much of the rise is being driven by their definitions of deaths of despair and not lung cancer or diabetes. Simply put, mid-aged white Americans are dying from highly preventable diseases, which could be viewed as conditions of the mind or spirit. And as we see here, these deaths are impacting all age cohorts of white Americans. As mentioned, Case and Deaton merely documented this phenomena. They did not discover any causes. However, they do advance an early theory that focuses on the role of opioids. This is a quote from their 2015 paper. The increase in midlife morbidity and mortality among U.S. white non-Hispanics is only partially understood. The increased availability of opioid prescriptions for pain that began in the late 1990s has been widely noted, as has the associated mortality. The CDC estimates that for each prescription painkiller death in 2008, there were 32 emergency department visits for misuse or abuse, 130 people who were abusers or dependents, and 825 non-medical users. Tighter controls on opioid prescription brought some substitution into heroin, and in this time, the United States saw rising quality and falling prices of heroin, as well as availability in areas where heroin had been previously largely unknown, end quote. This bleak note concludes Case and Deaton's 2015 paper, and in 2017 they expand their research and offer more explanations. This chart demonstrates that the rise of despair is largely restricted to whites with a high school degree or less. Other charts demonstrate that the trend is more severe among men, but women are also suffering. Now, Case and Deaton start leaving some of the health-specific data, and they start introducing some economic information. Some of the media have advanced a purely economic explanation for deaths of despair, yet we can see here that median household income for white Americans has seen modest growth in the last few decades. However, as we see here, the number of white men with a high school degree or less who are dropping out of the labor force has been increasing. This has not happened to white men with a bachelor's degree or more. So why is labor force participation important? Because a 2016 paper contained this dire statistic. Half of the men who are out of the labor force are taking pain medication, and 2/3 of those are taking a prescription painkiller, such as an opioid. As Case and Deaton demonstrate, deaths of despair are a growing trend among white Americans, particularly those with a high school degree or less. They do point to some important economic trends as potential causes. However, they put their focus on much more long-term socioeconomic causes. In their view, what has happened to working class people is a long-term process that began in the 1970s. Not only did job opportunities deteriorate for some people, but traditional social structures that often provided support and meaning also eroded. Traditional patterns of marriage, child rearing, and social and economic support slowly weakened. People also migrate away from the security of the legacy religions of their parents and grandparents and towards religions and worship that stress economic success or a search for connection. These changes in the economic and social life of working class people led to, quote, a loss of the structures that give life a meaning. They end their 2017 paper with this bleak prognosis. Behind this lie familiar stories about globalization and automation, changes in social customs that have allowed dysfunctional changes in patterns of marriage and child rearing, the decline of unions, and others. Ultimately, we see our stories about the collapse of working class whites after their heyday in the early 1970s and the pathologies that accompany such a decline. So why does this matter to us? It's because Elk County is 97% white, 30% of our population is between the ages of 40 and 59, the age cohorts most impacted by these trends, and only 18.5% of our residents have a bachelor's degree or higher, which is roughly half the national average. Likewise, our community is a historical manufacturing hub, which has allowed many of our residents to earn a decent living without going to college. Essentially, Elk County should be ground zero for deaths of despair. I sought to discover if it was. We start with drug overdoses. Data from the University of Chicago shows that drug overdose deaths are concentrated in Appalachia, and Elk County is not immune from this trend. As we can see, drug overdose deaths have risen across the United States, and Elk County has seen a large increase. Thankfully, we remain slightly below the Pennsylvania and Appalachian averages. This map is available online and allows us to get a sense of how severe the drug abuse epidemic is and how Elk County fits into the narrative. Although we are not in the worst impacted regions, we are nonetheless suffering. Case and Deaton's finding holds. We are experiencing drug overdose deaths of despair. Next, we turn our attention to suicides. Between 2008 and 2014, Pennsylvania's suicide rate was 13.19 per 100,000 residents. But tragically, Elk County had the highest suicide rate in the state at 16.09. As we can see on this map, we live in one of Pennsylvania's 2 suicide clusters. Once more, Case and Deaton's findings hold. Finally, we turn to chronic liver disease. This is a broad category of conditions, but one of the most common causes is cirrhosis of the liver, which is usually caused by alcoholism. I wish I was able to find better county-level data on chronic liver conditions, but what I did get my hands on did not suggest that we have a high level of chronic liver disease fatalities. However, it is worth noting that Elk County has an extremely high rate of alcohol consumption, and by some measures, as we can see, our alcohol consumption has grown. So while I have not uncovered evidence that we are suffering from the final death of despair, our high rate of alcohol consumption places us at risk. We have established that Elk County is suffering from 2 of the 3 deaths of despair, overdoses and suicides. We are threatened by the underlying cause of a third with our high rate of alcohol consumption. So how do we get to this point? As Case and Deaton speculate, there's likely not a purely economic explanation, but rather we are living with the consequences of the steady erosion of working class people. As I mentioned, behind these statistics lie familiar stories about globalization and automation. So I sought to understand what effects globalization and automation may have had on our local economy. But first, it's worthwhile to understand how our economy has evolved in recent years. As we can see, the ratio of manufacturing jobs in Elk County has declined from its peak in the 1970s of 55% to around 40% today. But this hides other important trends. The share of our population in the workforce has expanded since the 1970s, while the share of our population employed in manufacturing has typically bounced between 20 and 25%. Judging from this, it does not appear that manufacturing employment has collapsed in Elk County. I believe this is largely attributable to demographic trends. Our population has decreased by more than 20% since the 1970s. Our community has gotten smaller and older, which likely means that much more of our population is made up of working age adults. Data we previously discussed confirms this. 30% of our population is between the ages of 40 and 59. Meanwhile, the share of our population in the workforce peaked in the mid-1990s and has slightly decreased since. Even though there is no clear evidence that employment, particularly manufacturing employment, has taken a large hit, it is nonetheless important to see what effects globalization and automation may have had on our local economy. Now, since globalization is such a broad term, it's beneficial to look at specific, definable events. Because of this, I decided to study what impacts China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 may have had on our local economy. This map is based off a paper published in 2016, commuting zones, also called CZs, which are defined as clusters of counties that have the commuting structure of a local labor market. We are not able to specifically view Elk County, but the St. Mary CZ encompasses much of the local region. And as we can see, the St. Mary CZ is in the top 20% most negatively impacted CZs. Our local manufacturing economy remains amazingly resilient, but it has suffered at least one powerful external shock: Chinese trade. But this isn't only a story of free trade, though. Automation has likely changed the economy in profound ways as well. Some academics speculate that the rise in automation has reduced the number of mid-skill, mid-wage jobs in America. To understand how this may have happened, a 2003 paper describes how technological changes, starting in the 1970s, allowed routine manual and cognitive tasks to be automated, thus leading to a decline in employment in fields with those attributes. Therefore, the labor economy shifted to favor employment and skills that feature non-routine manual and cognitive tasks, which either require higher skills, thus favoring those with higher levels of education, or they favor low-skilled labor, such as retail work or janitorial services. This table serves as a framework for how we can think about which tasks are likely to be replaced by machines and which ones are likely to be complemented by them. Many manufacturing jobs feature a lot of picking, sorting, and other repetitive tasks, so large segments of our local economy are likely candidates for automation if they have not already been replaced by machines. Unfortunately, Firm-level data would be needed to understand exactly what impacts automation has had on our local economy. For now, we can only speculate that the rise of automation and computerization has probably displaced local workers. So I'm not going to spend too much time on compensation, wages, and income other than to highlight one key point. This graph shows how much on insurance compensation we receive per capita. As we can see, it is typically higher than the state average, with that gap expanding during economic downturns. Also, this graph demonstrates just how severely the Great Recession affected us here. We are likely still living with the consequences of that economic downturn. To understand how the recession and these other socioeconomic trends may have impacted our community bonds, it is worthwhile to talk about social capital, which is where I'll end the discussion on my research. For many people, the idea of social capital is foreign, despite the fact that many of us trade in social capital daily. Robert Putnam, a leading academic in the field, defines it as the features of social organizations, such as networks, norms, and social trust, that facilitate coordination and cooperation of mutual benefit. In short, it is the connections made daily among individuals and organizations, and the ways in which we utilize such connections. Putnam discovered that since the 1970s, Americans have become less civically engaged. For example, participation in bowling leagues has fallen. Weekly church-going rates have plummeted. Union membership has decreased, and monthly attendance of a club meeting of some variety has also gone down. Essentially, the organizations that tie us to our community have deteriorated. We are leading increasingly atomized lives. Thankfully, Penn State attempts to measure social capital by county. As we can see, the bonds of our community have been slowly eroding, and the Great Recession depleted our reserves. It has made a comeback. We have a long way to go if we wish to mend our community and increase civic engagement. So, I went over a lot tonight, but what does it actually mean? Where does it leave us? I started this project thinking things were worse off in Elk County than they actually are. But over the course of my research, one fact became crystal clear. Elk County is tough. We are a resilient community. Our local economy has taken some beatings, but is still chugging along. Wages and compensation are at a decent level here, and other indicators suggest social mobility is at a healthy level. The bonds of our community has frayed, yet we hang on. Communities facing similar pressures, particularly other Rust Belt and Appalachian communities, have collapsed, but we are still fighting. But our current sources of strength cannot be taken for granted. If we do not act soon, we will drive off several economic and demographic cliffs. Because of this, it is time for community leaders to pull the fire alarm. We are in the midst of a slow-moving crisis. As you can see, my research and presentation are void of any solutions. That's because we must start by identifying the problem. When you walk into a doctor's office, they don't start by amputating limbs. Instead, they diagnose the disease. That's what I sought to do. Next comes the hard part. What can be done about it? First, our community has to be honest with itself. It has to accept the illness that is among our own. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Once there's agreement and acceptance of the issues, community leaders can move to combat them. The first step to confront this problem, in my view, is to take back the narrative. Despite our current struggles, we have a lot to be proud of, and it's time we show it. Civilization is a story we tell ourselves about ourselves. So what is our story? Who are we as a community? For me, that's simple. We are a resilient community, founded by our ancestors who came here, of all places, to escape religious persecution and to build a better life. The towns they created represent one of the last vibrant manufacturing communities left in America. They went on to successfully integrate several waves of immigrants since. Our community has never failed to answer our nation's call to arms during a time of war, and for generations, we've produced the men and materials needed to create the greatest country on earth. That is our story. That is who we are. Thank you.
I'd like to, if anybody would like to ask